Hi, and welcome to Freedom Fighters Code Gray. This is a show where we discuss human trafficking, an issue that's happening across community in our own backyards. How does the sex industry interconnect with human trafficking? What does the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous people, how does that connect to sexual exploitation? Well, in today's episode, I have with me Dr. Robert Chrismas, a researcher, law enforcement officer, and an author who has recently published a book that we get to discuss today called River of Tears. It is such a pleasure to have you on the show today. Welcome, Bob. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, just to start off with today, I was wondering if you can share with our viewers and listeners a little bit about who you are and the work that you've been involved in over the decades.
Oh, where do I start? I'm 59 years old, but I think that I'm actually a 30-year-old trapped in a 60-year-old body. But I'm feeling my age these days. But I was born and raised in Winnipeg, Manitoba. I'm married with 4 adult children whom I all love, and they've all been very supportive of my law enforcement career and my academic and now my writing career. So I'm thrilled to be here to talk about this book. I'm currently 32 years in the Winnipeg Police Service, and I've been in law enforcement for, in total, probably close to 40. So I guess if I had Indigenous heritage, I'd definitely be in the Bear Clan. So I've done some military service and previous law enforcement experience as a sheriff and working with federal inmates. And I got back to my education later in my career and got to work on my master's degree 18 years into my career. And I just found it so enriching and rewarding that I immediately sought a way to continue my education. And long story short, I ended up working on my doctorate in peace and conflict studies here at the University of Manitoba.
And so your dissertation, as part of that doctorate program that you were a part of, looks at the sex industry in Canada. How did you get involved in research on this topic, and why did you decide to pursue research in this area?
Well, through my policing career, I've had wonderful opportunities to work in some interesting startups and some cutting edge investigative units. And midway through my career, I got deeply involved in missing persons. And right around the time when the Picton Pig Farm and the Highway of Tears in BC and the whole missing and murdered movement was starting, and we began recognizing in policing that these vulnerable youth who we were working with, who historically across Canada, they'd been looked at as nuisances, really were the most vulnerable people, and they were the ones largely being exploited in the sex industry. So I got deeply involved in that work for a number of years. Then flash forward 10 years to me selecting a topic for my doctoral research, and the professors told us all, pick something that you're passionate about because it'll get you through the work. And looking back on my career, I think the thing that I was most passionate about and was most challenging and yet most rewarding was my work with trying to intervene with sexually exploited youth. So I chose that for my PhD research.
So your topic of your thesis was on the sex industry in Canada. Can you tell us a little bit about your research process? Who were the participants of your study? What were some of the methodological challenges and processes that you took to actually undertake this study and conduct your research?
Yes. So selecting a topic for PhD research, you have to add something to the literature and to the body of research that hasn't been done yet. And you're expected to become basically an expert in the existing literature and the state of research on that field and that topic going into it. And what I found in my lit review and my preparation to do my research and select a topic was that a lot of voices had been left out. I felt that there should have been a lot more emphasis on people who have worked passionately in this area trying to interrupt the sex industry. For instance, people who make the laws, politicians who've been devoted, some of them have devoted their lives to trying to change the laws around the sex industry. Senior bureaucrats, police officers, prosecutors, A lot of the previous research never mentions police, and yet I've worked in the police, and I know those are some of the most passionately involved people around this issue. And then people working in government and non-government organizations and the sex industry survivors themselves. So I really wanted to try and give voice to those people. And studying peace and conflict studies, where I did at the Arthur V. Morrow Institute for Peace and Justice, there are some world-class scholars on narrative-based storytelling used in peace building. So I wanted to take a story-based approach, try and capture the stories, capture the narratives the way they describe it from people who have been working in that area. So I talked to 61 people in and around Winnipeg, Manitoba, gathered what amounts to 1,000 years of collective experience around the sex industry and being trafficked, and made my findings. And I took a grounded approach, meaning I went in with a open mind and tried to just wait without trying to see if a certain theory or model would apply, but rather talking to them to see what they had to say and see what flows from it. So the reason I did that is because I found that a lot of voices have been left out in the past.
Well, thank you for using your time doing your doctorate research and conducting this thesis in a way that helped to amplify these stories and to help shed light on voices who wanted their stories to be shared and maybe didn't have a platform or outlet to explain their narratives. And I have so many questions for you about that research, but we'll have to save that for another day, because I know that we're here to also talk about this book that you recently published and have launched, River of Tears. So I was just wondering if you could start off with telling us what inspired you to write this book.
Oh, so I really got the bug for writing during my grad studies, and I've done a lot of academic writing around policing and the sex industry and my views on and my findings around that. And I felt that telling a story would have so much more impact, and I'd be able to bring in all those elements around my policing background and experience, what I've found through all my research and my work in counter-exploitation. And also, I have also known, as I mentioned, through my studies, the power of the narrative and the power of stories. And I thought that I could create something more impactful that would be more accessible and reach more people. And my true hope is that this book does some social good. I've tried to dive deep into some aspects of psyche and the dynamics that are involved in human trafficking, policing, police-indigenous relations. Ultimately, the book is about inspiration and overcoming adversity and reconciliation.
Wow. At a high level, could you talk to us a little bit about what is this book about in terms of how does it address those topics? How does it address reconciliation and sexual exploitation and all of these issues that interconnect within our country?
Well, basically, it's a story about a young Indigenous woman who has a background. Of course, she's experiencing the transgenerational effects of colonization, Canada's settlement. Her parents were in the residential schools, and she distrusts the system and the police. But then her kid sister goes missing, and ultimately she ends up having to call the police. The police officer that comes has some of his own baggage and preset biases that he has to overcome. Eventually, they end up having to work together, and they start to see each other's views. So that's the reconciliation that I would say all of Canada needs to learn from. So they overcome their differences and these barriers and work together. And I don't want to give away the ending, but it's inspirational, I think.
Well, Dr. Chrismas, thank you so much for taking the time to share with us today about your research and your knowledge and your writing on this topic. And I'm really looking forward to delving more into a discussion about this book and the purpose and your hopes for this book after we take a short break.
What?
Hi, and welcome back to Freedom Fighters Code Gray. And today's episode, I have with me Dr. Robert Chrismas, who's shedding light on his recently published book called River of Tears. Dr. Chrismas, it has been so great to chat with you already and to learn about the important research and writing that you've undertaken to shed light on this topic. And so as we're talking about the book, River of Tears, I noticed that the cover photo has a very specific image for this novel. And I'm wondering, why did you choose that photo? And can you share a bit of a backstory of why you thought that was an appropriate choice for this book?
Yes, absolutely. A big theme in the book is the trauma and the stress that Indigenous people in Canada have gone through, and missing and murdered women, of course. And there's significance to the Forks in Winnipeg. It originally was a settlement that Winnipeg was founded on, but prior to that, it's known as a central meeting place for Turtle Island, the Indigenous community all across North America. So I really wanted to include the theme of the river, which pun intended, flows through the book. And the river is actually a metaphor for the river of anguish that flows through the impoverished core of every Canadian city and every city in North America, really, but it has a more meaning in the book. So I wanted an image there of an Indigenous woman looking out on the river at the Forks in Winnipeg, and my brother-in-law with Adam York Photography helped me with it.
In the past, you have published a lot academically in your lifetime and in your career as an author, and now you've kind of shifted to write this book. Why did you decide, or why did you think it was important to write a novel with fictional characters about these topics that you're passionate about?
For a number of reasons, but the biggest reason is because I felt that I could create a story that would have more impact and more meaning and have a broader reach and get into more people's hands. So I, through my peace and conflict studies, I learned the power of the narrative and power of shifting the public discourse. And I felt this could potentially do it more effectively than my previous academic writing had done.
You talk about the power of the narrative and shifting mindsets. What is your hope for this book? What kind of mindsets do you want to see shifted? What kind of narratives do you want to see changed as a result of you publishing this book?
Well, I wanted, and I still want to contribute to the discourse in Canada around reconciliation and understanding each other's viewpoints and making a better and more inclusive, less divisive society. So that's my grand goal. My smaller goal with this piece of literature is that I would love if it became a textbook or became one that really took off and people used as a teaching tool for how we can see each other's viewpoints. I tried to add a lot of information in the book and data that I think that a lot of people might not be aware of, and tied it into a story with impact that makes it interesting and somewhat fun to read, even though it's a dark subject.
One of the themes of the book is to highlight the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women, but you also address the issue of sexual exploitation and sex trafficking in Canada, as well as the impacts of colonialism. Can you help shed light on how do those three themes interconnect, and how does, for example, the missing and murdered Indigenous issue that we are facing here in Canada relate to sex trafficking?
Whew, that could be a whole course. What I'll say is, for one, I always caution that people who grow up in poverty, without that kind of adversity, you couldn't really achieve a lot in life. And basically all of our most successful people in life in the world that we know have been through a lot of adversity. You can't really achieve a lot if you don't have it. But there's been longitudinal research that shows that for the most of us, most of us will wind up in the same socioeconomic status that we're born into over the long run. what I found in my research and in my experience is that a lot of people have their resilience beaten down, their ability to resist being targeted. And those are the people when they're vulnerable. Often they're vulnerable because of lack of educational and job opportunities, because they live in poverty. And here I caution again, like, not everybody who lives in poverty is a victim by any stretch, but a lot of people who are living in impoverished conditions are less resilient to being targeted by sex traffickers who are happy to make money off of them. And those are the ones who they do target. So that was a big finding in my research. And I would hope that by adding to the discourse and raising awareness and furthering education to young people not to be targeted, how to avoid being vulnerable, to adults, how to support them, how to recognize the signs that somebody around you is being trafficked or exploited, and then intervene and help. That's what I'm hoping to contribute to.
Education and awareness is so key as prevention. So I'm grateful that you are also bringing that up in our discussion today, and the importance of equipping youth and children with different skills and information that they need to make informed choices and to be aware of this real issue that's taking place across our country. I know that listening to stories is very impactful. And from my experience doing research as well, it can be life-changing. And I'm wondering, after listening to 61 stories as part of your research, and then also contemplating lots of stories and reading information in order to write this book, how has this work personally impacted you?
Well, one day I interviewed two sex industry survivors, people who had been exploited in indescribable ways over a number of years and taken advantage of. And I did two in one day, and I swore at the end of that day that I would never do that again, because opening yourself up and being sensitive to trying to really listen and absorb those stories and then sit with them and analyze them and make recommendations from them, you kind of open yourself up. And it has been, that part was a little bit tough, but nothing compared to people who have actually been trafficked. And I'm so grateful that people that I spoke to opened themselves up to me and allowed me to try and tell aspects of their stories to try and raise awareness for the general public. And some of those stories come into this story in The River of Tears.
When you say people opened up and you're grateful for them sharing their experiences with you, from your position as a researcher, but even your dual identity as a law enforcement officer, how did you establish that sense of trust and mutual respect within the research process?
I believe that it was largely a part that I had built a reputation in my community for being trusted. I also felt that people have told me they felt that they had confidence that I would have the moral courage to just say the truth about what the flaws are in the system, what the strengths are, the flaws, and what we could fix potentially, and just being open and honest with people about what I can and cannot do with the research findings and what I will do. Right now, writing the River of Tears and the previous books and literature that I've written, I feel like I'm fulfilling my word, because I told them all that I would do everything I can to put the word out there and try and raise awareness and change the discourse in society.
For someone who's tuning in today and maybe they don't really know anything about sex trafficking and sexual exploitation in Canada, what are some things that you feel like you would like to share or highlight from your novel or your research that helps people understand what this issue really looks like in our communities?
A lot of people think that it can't touch them. and that it's not in my backyard kind of issue. It's somebody else's issue, but it really isn't. It's an issue for all of us because it could happen, and it does happen to people from upper and middle class homes. It happens to people in all different circumstances, children and young women. I say young women and children. Men do get exploited as well, but the bulk of the industry, at least in Manitoba and most of it in Canada, is oriented around women. Sex traffickers make a business of it. They exploit people, they take advantage and earn money off of them, and they're only too willing to take advantage of people who are in positions of vulnerability. And what I would like people to take away from my literature and from this new book is just the fact that it's all of our responsibility, and reconciliation, rectifying these deep social scourges like the sex industry are something that are not somebody else's issue. There's something for all of us to participate in. And if we do, if and when we do, and the whole discourse shifts around that, and you're playing a huge part in doing that by doing your show and all the work that you do, when the discourse shifts around that, then our culture will shift in Canada.
Bob, where can people get more information regarding the research that you've done, read your articles, but as well purchase a copy of this novel that you've recently published?
It's coming. It just was released a couple of weeks ago, so it's coming online with all the major bookstores, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Chapters. But there's links. I've put all the links in my webpage and information. There's links to all my literature and things that I've written as well. If you're interested, it's at bchristmas.com. No T in Christmas.
Perfect. We'll make sure that we have that up on the screen and in the description as well for those who are tuning into our show today. Is there anything that you would like to add with the couple minutes that we have left remaining of our show today?
Well, one of my favorite things to talk about is the power of knowledge and education. I quit school when I was 15, joined the workforce, did my construction, eventually got into policing. I didn't get into my advanced education until 18 years into my policing career, and now I've got a PhD. So if you're thinking of going, don't think about going to school. No matter what you're studying, any kind of education is good. And I encourage people, I've got a whole list of people who are young and old who I'm always encouraging to continue their education.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to share your research, your knowledge, your insights, and your expertise with us on the show today. I also just want to thank you for your ongoing service to the community and really the important work that you're undertaking to help shed light on the realities of sex trafficking in the sex industry in Canada. Everything that you're doing is absolutely invaluable. And I really hope our viewers and our listeners will get a copy of your book and that they will continue to learn and to educate themselves as you have shared, whether that's reading your thesis or an article that you've published, to really understand what are people's experiences in Canada? How can we listen better to individuals' narratives and shift mindsets and discourses in order to move forward with reconciliation, but also to prevent exploitation from happening in our communities? So thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
If you're tuning into the show and you are in a situation of immediate danger, we do ask that you please call 911. If you're looking for information and support as it relates to human trafficking, you can call the National Human Trafficking Hotline that's available 24/7 at 1-833-900-1010. Again, that's 1-833-900-1010. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode, for taking the time to learn about the realities of sexual exploitation in Canada. And we hope that you'll join us next time on Freedom Fighters Code Gray. I had the opportunity to delve into Dr. Robert Christmas's book, River of Tears, and I'm really grateful for the way that he is able to portray narratives and highlight issues that are currently happening in Canada. He touches upon missing and murdered Indigenous women. He talks about the biases and stereotypes that some law enforcement officers struggle with, and how we need to really unpack and challenge mindsets in Canada in order to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation, but also what all of this means and how it relates to the issue of sex trafficking in Canada.